That morning, my life ended with a text message. A single buzz on my phone, a line of cold words, and the world I had built for 15 years collapsed into silence. Clara, we're done. The divorce papers are on the way. I've emptied our account. Don't try to contact me. No explanation, no face-to-face conversation, just a sentence on a glowing screen. If you've ever had your chest tighten so sharply that it felt like a rib snapped in half, you will understand the silence that followed me through that morning. I sat at the edge of our bed, the sheets still carrying his cologne, staring at the phone that had just become a weapon. If you have ever given someone the best years of your life only to be dismissed in a single gesture, you know why I must tell this story. I don't speak to seek pity. I speak because there are women, maybe even men, who will sit where I sat, staring at a screen that suddenly decided their fate, and they will need to know they are not alone. My name is Clara Mitchell. I am 37 years old, and until that morning, I thought I understood marriage. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought sacrifice was honored. I had spent years cooking meals he barely touched, managing bills he rarely glanced at, keeping a home alive with warmth he no longer entered. I didn't realize I was tending a house already abandoned. Let me take you back to that moment. The blinds were half open, letting in the thin winter light. On the nightstand sat 2 coffee mugs from the day before, one empty, one untouched. His was the empty one. Mine was still full, cold, with a layer of cream hardened on top. That detail haunts me now. He had drunk his coffee quickly, as if he knew he was leaving. I had let mine sit, waiting for him to smile across the table, waiting for conversation that never came. When I first read the message, I laughed. A sharp, broken sound that didn't belong to me. I thought it was a cruel joke, some kind of mistake. Then I opened our joint bank app. The balance read 0. Every cent we had worked for, every dollar I had scrimped to save, gone. In less than 10 minutes, my marriage was dissolved, my finances destroyed, and my sense of self dismantled. I want you to understand why this story matters, because people often imagine betrayal as a scene, voices raised, accusations thrown, a door slammed. Mine came with no sound, no confrontation, just absence. The kind of betrayal that doesn't bruise your skin but carves into your sense of reality. I tell this because silence can be more violent than words. That morning, I didn't cry. Tears would have been a mercy. Instead, I felt something heavier, a numbness that pinned me to the bed like a stone pressed against my chest. I remember counting my breaths, making sure each one still came, because part of me was certain it wouldn't. 15 years, erased in less than 15 words. Do you know what hurt most? It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the divorce. It was the realization that he didn't think I deserved a conversation. That my life, my presence, my existence as his wife could be dismissed with a swipe of his finger across a phone screen. He chose convenience over dignity. He chose cowardice over truth. I keep replaying our last dinner together. It was 2 nights before the message. I made roast chicken with rosemary, his favorite. He ate quickly, barely speaking, his eyes flicking to his phone every few minutes. I had asked, "Is something wrong?" He said, "Just work." And then he went upstairs, leaving his plate half full. I scraped the leftovers into the trash that night, never knowing it was the last meal I would cook for him. Why am I telling you all this? Because betrayal has a texture, a smell, a weight. It isn't abstract. It is the cold side of a bed that stays empty. It is the silence of a phone that once rang with love but now delivers absence. It is the unpaid bill you find on the counter because he had already decided the account was no longer yours. I thought about my parents that morning. They had always told me marriage was work, that love was endurance. I believed them. I endured the long nights, the distance, the dismissive sighs when I spoke of my dreams. I endured because I thought it would matter. But when I looked at that text, I realized endurance had only trained me for abandonment. I am Clara Mitchell, and this is why I speak. Not because I want revenge, not because I want sympathy, but because silence is the enemy of truth. My husband believed he could vanish with our money and our years, leaving me in a shadow that no one would see. He had no idea that shadows speak louder when you bring them into the light. That was the beginning of my unraveling, but also the beginning of something else. A seed of clarity buried under the rubble of betrayal. You may not see it yet, but by the end, You will understand why he should have thought twice before pressing send. The text message shattered me, but the truth is the cracks had been forming for years. Betrayal doesn't arrive fully grown. It creeps in slowly through the things you convince yourself not to notice. Looking back, I can see it all so clearly now, like a film I didn't realize was being played in reverse. The late nights at the office that stretched into mornings, the business trips that always seemed to appear out of nowhere, the way his phone became an extension of his hand, always turned slightly away from me on the table. At first, I told myself he was just tired, overworked, carrying the stress of adulthood like the rest of us. But now I know those were not burdens. They were rehearsals for an exit he had been planning long before the message ever reached me. I think about our dinners. In the beginning, they were simple but warm. I would make pasta, roasted vegetables, or the chicken dish he claimed was his favorite, and we would talk about our day. He would listen, ask questions, even laugh at my small stories from work. Over time, the conversations thinned out like soup stretched too far with water. He ate quickly, more out of duty than pleasure, and retreated to his laptop. He stopped noticing when I wore the dress he once said brought out the color in my eyes. He stopped asking about my dreams, about the art classes I wanted to take. It was as if I had become the wallpaper of his life, present but unseen. Even money became a silent battlefield. I trusted him with the account because that's what wives are told to do: share, merge, believe in partnership. He handled the bigger bills, the investments, while I managed groceries, utilities, the day-to-day rhythm of a household. I noticed little oddities: a charge here, a withdrawal there, transactions labeled vaguely. When I asked, he would sigh, tired and impatient, and tell me not to worry about things I didn't understand. "It's complicated, Clara," he would say, as if I were a child asking about algebra. And because I wanted peace, I let it go. But the signs were not only financial, they were emotional. He used to kiss me goodbye in the mornings. That gesture faded into a distracted nod as he grabbed his keys. He used to call me when flights were delayed. Those calls turned into quick texts, often hours late. I began to feel like I was living with a ghost who still occupied a body. And like so many wives before me, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I wasn't beautiful enough. Maybe the years had dulled me the way age dulls silver. I polished myself with effort, new clothes, new recipes, new ways of speaking, hoping he would shine me back into relevance. But nothing worked. The cruelest detail is how he managed to make me complicit in my own invisibility. Whenever I raised a concern, he would twist it back toward me. If I said he seemed distant, he accused me of being needy. If I asked about money, he called me paranoid. If I mentioned his phone never leaving his hand, he laughed and said I was jealous of technology. Slowly, I learned to silence myself. To keep the peace, I stopped asking questions. That silence, I realize now, was the ground where his betrayal grew roots. I remember one night more vividly than most. It was our anniversary, 13 years together. I had booked a small cabin in the mountains, just the two of us, thinking we could reconnect away from the noise. He spent half the drive on his phone, his voice low, as if even the trees outside couldn't be trusted with his words. When we arrived, I cooked us dinner, opened a bottle of wine I had been saving. He barely touched it. Instead, he fell asleep early on the couch, the glow of his phone still on his face. I sat alone at the table, watching the candle burn down to wax, realizing I was celebrating an anniversary by myself. That night should have been my warning. Even with all the cracks, I held on, because that's what love had taught me: to endure, to hope, to keep patching the walls no matter how many times they collapsed. I told myself marriage was not meant to be perfect. I repeated the vows in my head like a spell, for better, for worse. And when he looked at me with those tired eyes, I convinced myself he was still mine, just buried under layers of stress I could help him lift. I didn't know he was already digging his escape route. Now, in the quiet after the text, all those years rise in me like ghosts. The ignored dinners, the absent touches, the money that slipped away while I pretended not to see. They line up before me like evidence in a courtroom, each detail pointing toward the same verdict. He had been leaving me long before he finally walked out. The text was only the signature on a departure already written in silence. What I didn't understand then was that betrayal doesn't just happen in the moment someone hurts you. It is built brick by brick, moment by moment, until the wall between you is too high to climb. And by the time you realize it, the person you love is already on the other side, taking everything with them. I am Clara Mitchell. I tell you this because sometimes the past is the only map that explains the present. If I had seen the signs sooner, maybe I would have walked away with my dignity still intact. But instead, I learned the hardest truth of all. Love can vanish quietly, and you may not hear it leave until it slams the door behind you. The morning after the message, I walked into the kitchen as if the walls themselves had shifted overnight. The chairs were still tucked neatly under the table. The refrigerator hummed like always, but nothing felt the same. The air had weight, as if even the silence knew what had been taken from me. I opened the laptop, my hands trembling, and logged into the bank account again. 0. A hollow number staring back at me, stripping away 15 years of saving, budgeting, sacrificing. The rent, the insurance, the groceries, everything had been siphoned away into a void that bore his name. Betrayal has many shapes, but the clean theft of money you both earned together cuts deeper than most. It was not just dollars that vanished. It was every overtime hour I worked, every birthday gift I skipped buying for myself so he could have something he wanted, every night I stayed home to cook instead of going out with friends. Gone. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might crack my ribs. He hadn't left me with a little to survive on, not even a shred of dignity. He had taken it all. And he hadn't even left a note on the counter, not a single word beyond that message. Divorce, betrayal, and financial ruin delivered through pixels. That was his grand gesture after 15 years of marriage. The more I thought about it, the more pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The sudden trips, the missing weekends, the way he insisted we didn't need paper statements anymore, only online records he alone managed. I had been blind, or perhaps I had chosen blindness because the truth was too unbearable. Now the truth was sitting in front of me, undeniable and merciless. He hadn't just abandoned me, he had orchestrated it. The hours after the discovery moved like sludge. I walked through the house, touching objects like they belonged to a stranger. His jacket still hung by the door, the faint smell of his cologne embedded in the fabric. His shoes lined up neatly on the mat. It was obscene, the way his things remained while the man himself had evaporated. I wondered if he would ever come back for them, or if leaving them was another way to remind me of his absence. When I finally called his phone, it rang twice before going straight to voicemail. His voice greeted me. Cheerful, recorded years ago when we still believed in forever. Hearing it now was like being mocked by a ghost. I didn't leave a message. What was there left to say to a man who had already spoken his last words through a text? That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, each shadow on the wall morphing into a memory. His smile when he first asked me out, his hand holding mine on our wedding day, the way he used to tuck the blanket around me when I fell asleep on the couch. All illusions now. My mind replayed them like fragile glass shattering in slow motion. By dawn, something inside me shifted. Fear gave way to a sharp, cutting clarity. If he believed he could vanish with our money and leave me broken, he was wrong. I was not the kind of woman who would crumble quietly in the corner. I had given too much, sacrificed too much to let him erase me like that. I decided then that if I had to crawl through every piece of paperwork, every bank record, every thread of evidence, I would find the trail he left behind. And when I did, he would face the truth he thought he could outrun. I began with the obvious, the bank statements. Though the balance was gone, the records told a story. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Amounts withdrawn just below the threshold that would have triggered alerts. Dates that aligned perfectly with his so-called business trips. The more I studied, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't a moment of anger or impulse. It was methodical, calculated. He had been emptying our future piece by piece, hiding the theft under the cloak of ordinary life. I felt sick, but the sickness fueled me. Every entry in that statement was a clue, and I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered it all. By mid-morning, I reached out to the bank directly. The woman on the phone spoke kindly, but her words confirmed what I already suspected. The account had been drained into a secondary account under his name only. My name, though once printed on every statement, had been removed from his future entirely. She couldn't disclose details without proper legal documents, but she told me enough to know he had thought of everything, except me finding the strength to fight back. The betrayal was complete, yet in its completeness, it revealed something unexpected. Beneath the devastation, I discovered a well of resolve I didn't know I had. I was Clara Mitchell, and I was still here. He had taken the money, the marriage, the trust, but he had not taken my will. As I closed the laptop, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace. It was the stillness before a storm. For the first time since the text arrived, I felt the weight shift off my chest. The story wasn't ending here. He had written the first cruel chapter, but the rest would be mine to tell. That day, I promised myself one thing. I would not let his betrayal define me. If he thought he could steal my life and leave me powerless, he was about to learn how wrong he was. When betrayal takes everything from you, clarity becomes your only weapon. After discovering the trail of missing money, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. The next morning, I walked into a law office with a folder full of bank statements I had printed at midnight. My hands shook as I slid them across the polished desk. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Reynolds, studied the numbers in silence. Then she looked up at me and said words that cut through the fog in my mind. "Clara, this is fraud. You have more power here than you think." For the first time since the text, I felt a pulse of strength return. The weeks that followed were a blur of documents, signatures, and quiet determination. I traced every wire transfer, every shadowed withdrawal, until the paper trail pointed directly to him. He had moved money into a private account, then used it for expenses he never told me about. Hotel bills, dinners, luxury purchases that mocked the modest life I thought we shared. Each receipt was another knife, but each knife sharpened my resolve. It wasn't long before word spread to his family. They had always seen me as the quiet wife, the one who blended into the background. Now they were confronted with the truth. Their successful son, their respectable brother, had abandoned me with nothing and tried to erase me without consequence. One evening, I agreed to meet them at his parents' house. I sat at the table where countless family dinners had taken place, where I had once served food and smiled through conversations that left me invisible. This time, I wasn't invisible. He was there too, sitting across from me, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The man I once loved now looked like a stranger wearing his skin. His mother broke the silence first. "Clara, surely there's been a mistake. He wouldn't do this to you." I slid the folder onto the table and opened it slowly, page by page, bank transfers with his name on them, receipts from hotels in cities he had never mentioned, the dates lined up too neatly to deny. His face drained of color, but he tried to speak anyway. "You don't understand, Clara. It wasn't like that." I looked at him steadily. "Then explain the zero in our account. Explain the luxury hotel when you told me you were on a business trip in Chicago. Explain why I had to learn our marriage was over from a text message." My voice was calm, but the silence in the room was louder than any shouting could have been. His father leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low, as if he couldn't bear the answer. My husband, no, the man who used to be my husband, opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The evidence was too clear, too damning. The silence that followed was the kind that suffocates, heavy and undeniable. His sister, who had always treated me with thinly veiled disdain, finally whispered, "How could you do this?" She wasn't speaking to me. For once, her scorn was turned toward him. And in that moment, I realized something. Truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs to stand in the room long enough to be seen. I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood. "I'm not here for your apologies," I said quietly. "I'm here because you all needed to know who he really is. The man you've praised, the man you've trusted. He left me with nothing but a text and an empty account. That is your son. That is your brother." He shifted in his chair, his lips pressing into a thin line, but he still said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The truth had already spoken for him. When I walked out of that house, I felt taller than I had in years. Not because I had humiliated him, but because I had finally stopped hiding behind silence. For so long, I had believed my voice carried no weight. That night, I learned it carried more weight than all his excuses combined. In the days that followed, he tried to call me. Voicemails piled up on my phone, filled with half-hearted explanations and empty attempts at reconciliation. I didn't return a single one. I didn't need to. The truth had already burned the bridge, and I had no intention of rebuilding it. Instead, I focused on the future. The legal process had begun, and with it, the possibility of reclaiming what was stolen. Not just money, but dignity, autonomy, and the quiet strength I had allowed to be buried for too long. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was mine to shape. When people ask why I didn't scream, why I didn't throw the papers in his face, or curse him for what he had done, I tell them this: silence is not weakness when it is deliberate. My silence that night was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of truth standing taller than lies. I am Clara Mitchell. I was betrayed, abandoned, and robbed, but I did not break. I stood before the man who tried to erase me, and I let the evidence speak louder than rage ever could. He thought he could control the story by disappearing, but the moment the truth filled that room, he lost control forever. The weeks after that confrontation unfolded like a storm breaking apart a fragile roof. Once the truth was out, it spread faster than he could contain it. His colleagues began to hear whispers, the kind that never die once they start circulating. I didn't have to say a word. Documents have a way of speaking for themselves when they fall into the right hands. His reputation, the one he had carefully polished for years, started to crack. What shocked me most was how quickly people distanced themselves from him. Business partners who once praised his reliability suddenly found excuses not to return his calls. Invitations he used to receive without effort stopped arriving. The man who had always walked with arrogance began to shrink under the weight of his own exposure. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. Miss Reynolds guided me through every step, each form another nail in the coffin of the life he thought he could keep hidden. Bank subpoenas revealed more than I imagined. The secondary account wasn't just a safety net. It was a funnel into debt he had been hiding for years. Credit cards maxed out in my name, loans taken without my knowledge, obligations tied directly to me. He hadn't only stolen from me, he had tried to bury me in his failures. But instead of drowning, I held on to the evidence and let it lift me. The day in court came sooner than expected. He sat across from me in the sterile room, his once perfect suit wrinkled, his eyes darting like a man trapped in a corner. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The judge listened patiently as the attorneys presented the case. When the bank records appeared on the screen, there was no denying them. Line after line showed the truth. Transfers, withdrawals, lavish spending, all carried out under his name while leaving me with nothing. His lawyer tried to argue stress, temporary lapses in judgment, even love gone wrong. But the judge's expression never softened. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice even. He didn't just leave me, Your Honor. He erased me. He stole not just money, but years of sacrifice, and he tried to make sure I would have nothing to stand on when he was gone. But he underestimated me. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My words landed heavier in their calmness. The ruling was clear. He was ordered to return the funds, every last cent with penalties attached. Assets he thought were safe under his control were seized. Properties he had invested in secretly were redirected. For a man who believed he could walk away richer, the irony was sharp. He left poorer than when he started. The silence in the courtroom after the judgment felt like a bell tolling the end of his charade. His downfall didn't stop in the courtroom. His family, once his shield, no longer defended him. His mother, who had begged me to believe it was all a mistake, refused to look at him when the evidence was undeniable. His father, who once admired his ambition, told him plainly that he had shamed the family. His sister, who had mocked me for years, now avoided him as if betrayal were contagious. The empire of respect he had built collapsed, brick by brick, until he was left standing alone in the rubble. I should have felt triumph, but what I felt was something quieter, deeper. It wasn't satisfaction at his suffering. It was release. For so long, I had been chained to his shadow, measured against his moods, defined by his choices. Watching his world fall apart wasn't revenge. It was freedom. Yet freedom carried its own weight. Strangers who heard my story often asked how I found the strength to fight. I told them strength is not born in one moment. It is forged in the years of silence, the quiet endurance, the small humiliations that you tuck away. When the final betrayal comes, all those fragments gather into something unbreakable. That was my strength. He tried once more to reach me, weeks after the ruling. A letter appeared in my mailbox, his handwriting uneven, as if shame had clung to the pen. He wrote about regret, about mistakes, about wishing things could return to how they were. I didn't finish reading it. I folded the paper, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. The past belonged to him. The future was mine. From that moment, I stopped thinking of myself as the woman he left. I was Clara Mitchell, the woman who survived, the woman who stood before lies and let the truth burn them down, the woman who learned that silence, when used with purpose, is more powerful than rage. In the end, he lost everything he thought he valued: money, reputation, family respect. I gained something far greater: clarity. The clarity to see that love without respect is hollow, that endurance without recognition is slavery, and that betrayal, as cruel as it is, can also be liberation. I walked away not with revenge, but with dignity. He was left with the ruins of his choices. And as much as he may have believed I would always carry the weight of his betrayal, the truth is simple. I set it down. He remained shackled to it. When the court battle ended and the dust began to settle, I found myself alone in a quiet house that finally felt like mine. His jacket no longer hung by the door. His shoes no longer lined the mat. The absence that once suffocated me now breathed freedom into every corner. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and realizing for the first time in years that I could hear my own heartbeat without fear. It wasn't racing from anxiety. It was steady, calm, alive. The strangest part of recovery is how ordinary it looks. I still made coffee each morning, but I drank it slowly, savoring the warmth instead of waiting for a smile that never came. I still walked through the grocery store aisles, but this time I picked items only for myself, no longer planning meals that would go untouched. Even folding laundry felt different. Each shirt, each towel was mine, no longer a silent service to someone who never noticed. At first, I thought freedom would roar. I imagined it as a grand celebration, a victorious shout. Instead, it whispered. It came in the form of peace, in the ability to sit at my table with a book and not wonder where he was. It came in the form of nights where I slept deeply without checking the phone beside me. That was the true victory. Not the judgment in court, not the money reclaimed, but the restoration of my own quiet soul. Friends often ask me if I hated him. The truth is I don't. Hatred ties you to the one who wronged you, and I had no intention of dragging his shadow into my future. What I felt was clarity. He had shown me who he was, and though it hurt, it also freed me from illusions I clung to for too long. Sometimes liberation comes disguised as loss. One evening, months later, I walked past the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I carried myself differently. Shoulders back, gaze steady, no longer shrinking. That was when I realized betrayal had given me a gift he never intended: the courage to live without apology. Life after him is not perfect, but it is mine. I manage my own finances now, carefully and proudly. I travel when I choose. I spend weekends the way I want. I even signed up for the art classes I once pushed aside. Each brushstroke on the canvas feels like reclaiming a piece of myself he tried to erase. The lesson I take from all of this is simple. Trust is sacred, and if someone breaks it, you are not obligated to keep carrying the ruins. We are taught to endure, to hold on no matter what. But sometimes the bravest act is to let go, to walk away with nothing but your dignity and rebuild from there. And believe me, dignity weighs far less than betrayal. To anyone listening who has ever felt discarded, invisible, or robbed of your worth, hear me when I say this. You are not defined by what someone took from you. You are defined by how you choose to rise after. If I could survive a betrayal delivered by text message and an empty account, you can survive your storm too. And when you do, you'll find that silence can transform into strength and endings can open doors you never imagined. I am Clara Mitchell. My husband thought he ended my story with a single message, but he only ended his role in it. The rest of the story is mine, and it is only beginning. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. Stories like mine matter because they remind us all that betrayal does not have the final word. If you want to hear more stories of resilience, of people who have turned pain into power, I invite you to stay connected here. Subscribe, share, and continue with me, because the more we tell these truths, the less power betrayal holds over any of us.